In the vast solitude of Montana's ranch country, where winter winds whisper tales of both loss and redemption, Wyatt Hale's carefully ordered world is about to change forever. For 5 years, he's lived like a ghost in his own life, his sprawling cattle ranch, both sanctuary and prison, since losing his wife and unborn child. The only company he keeps are the echoes of what might have been. But on a bitter December evening, he returns to find a stranger in his cabin, a pregnant woman asleep in his chair, her face bearing the subtle marks of someone running from something, darker than the gathering storm outside. Clara Bennett never meant to stay. She thought she'd found an abandoned hunting cabin, a brief shelter from both the blizzard and her past. Could these two broken souls heal each other's hearts? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn crept across the Montana sky like an old friend who knew better than to arrive announced. Wyatt Hale had been up for hours already, his morning routine as unchanging as the mountains that crowned his 1,000 acres. The coffee in his thermos had gone cold, but he barely noticed anymore. These days, taste was just memory. His boots crunched through the frost-covered grass as he made his final check on the pregnant heifers. December was always a delicate time, the balance between life and death as thin as the ice on the water. Troughs. Miguel would be arriving soon to help with the fence repair on the north pasture, but these early morning rounds belonged to Wyatt alone. They were his meditation, his penance, his way of keeping the shadows at bay. Back at the ranch house, sunlight filtered through unwashed windows, casting accusatory beams across the dusty hardwood floors. Sarah had always kept them gleaming. The thought came unbidden, as it always did, followed by the familiar ache that 5 years hadn't managed to dull. His gaze drifted to his desk drawer, the one he never opened except on nights when the silence grew too loud. "Mornin', boss," Miguel's voice carried from the porch, saving Wyatt from himself. The younger man stood in the doorway, his breath visible in the cold air. At 35, Miguel Ramirez had worked the ranch for nearly a decade, becoming more family than employee. He was one of the few who remembered Sarah's laugh, who knew better than to mention the silence that had taken its place. "Coffee's fresh," Wyatt managed. Though they both knew it wasn't an invitation to linger, Miguel nodded, understanding in his eyes as he poured some into his own thermos. They had their routine, these two men who spoke more in actions than words. The drawer in Wyatt's desk held more than just the photograph he couldn't bring himself to look at. It contained paperwork from the accident, clinical words that failed to capture the magnitude of what he'd lost. Vehicle collision, immediate. Fatality, second trimester pregnancy. Words that turned his world into statistics, his love story into a police report. "North fence won't fix itself," Wyatt said, pushing back from his desk. Miguel followed him out, their boots creating twin trails in the morning frost. The sun was higher now, painting the mountains in shades of promise that Wyatt had long since stopped believing in. As they worked, the familiar rhythm of physical labor kept the memories at bay. Posts needed replacing, wire needed tightening, simple problems with simple solutions. Unlike the empty rooms of his house, unlike the nursery that would never see a child, these were things he could fix with his hands. The wind carried the scent of snow, and Wyatt's experienced eye turned to the gathering clouds. Winter storms could blow in fast here, turning the landscape into a white prison of memories and regrets. He'd learned to read the sky's warnings, to prepare for the isolation that came with Montana winters. What he hadn't learned was how to fill the emptiness that echoed through his house, growing louder with each passing season. "Storm's coming," Miguel observed, his tone careful. "Might want to check the generator, boss. Looking like it could be a big one." Wyatt nodded, already calculating what needed to be secured. The ranch was his responsibility. Livestock, buildings, equipment, everything except the hollow space inside his chest where Sarah used to live. That he left untouched, like the face down. photograph in his drawer, like the rooms he never entered anymore. As Miguel drove away that evening, Wyatt stood on his porch, watching the sun sink behind clouds heavy with snow. The temperature was dropping, and the wind had picked up, carrying with it the promise of change. He didn't know then, couldn't have known, that by this time tomorrow, his carefully maintained solitude would be shattered by a stranger seeking shelter from more than just the storm. For now, he simply turned back to his empty house, to his cold dinner, to the silence that had become both companion and curse. The drawer in his desk remained closed, but Sarah's presence lingered in every corner, in every shadow, in every moment between heartbeats. Tomorrow would be another day of routine, of work, of carefully maintained distance from anything that might crack the walls he'd built around his grief, or so he thought. Clara's fingers traced the worn leather cover of her journal, its pages now dog-eared and swollen from the snow that had seeped into her backpack. She'd started it the day after Thomas's funeral, when the walls of their little house in Missoula began closing in around her. The first entry was barely legible, written through tears she thought would never stop. October 15th, their taking. Everything, piece by piece. James showed up today with paperwork I supposedly signed, giving him power of attorney over Thomas's estate. I don't remember signing anything. Thomas always handled the papers his family put in front of us. Just formalities, he'd say, with that worried look he'd get whenever his brother was involved. Huddled in the stranger's cabin, Clara pulled her grandmother's quilt tighter around her shoulders. The cabin's owner would return eventually. These places were never truly abandoned, but she just needed a few hours of rest. The baby had been restless all day, as if sensing her anxiety. November 1st, found out today why Thomas was so distant those last few weeks. Hidden in his desk at school was a letter he never mailed. He was planning to leave too, to break free from his family's grip. "My dear Clara," he wrote, "I've secured teaching positions for us both in Oregon, far enough that James can't interfere." He never got the chance to tell me. The aneurysm took him the next day. The wood stove's dying embers cast dancing shadows. Across the cabin walls, Clara should get up, add another log, but exhaustion had settled into her bones. 6 months pregnant, and she'd been driving for 3 days straight, taking back roads, paying cash at small motels, always looking over her shoulder. November 20th, James came by again, said he was concerned about my mental state, brought a doctor with him, their family physician who's known them for decades. They want me to rest at some private facility until after the baby comes. For my own good, they said. For the baby's protection. I saw the papers in James's briefcase. Temporary guardianship papers. There's nothing temporary about what they're planning. She hadn't meant to end up this far into Montana's ranch country, but when she'd spotted James's black SUV at the gas station in Bozeman, panic sent her west, then north, following roads that grew increasingly remote. The storm had caught her by surprise, forcing her off the rural highway onto this private road. December 1st, Thomas always said his brother collected. People's secrets like others collect art. Leverage, he called it. Today I understood why. James showed me photos of Thomas and me, of the private moments we thought were ours alone. Think carefully about fighting me on this, Clara. Think about what's best for everyone. The threat was clear. Cooperate, or he'd destroy Thomas's reputation at the school, taint every memory of the man I loved. The leather-bound journal had been Thomas's last gift to her, given the morning of the day he died. "Write our story," he'd said, kissing her forehead. "Every chapter." He'd been distracted, preoccupied. Now she knew why. He'd been planning their escape, trying to protect her from what he knew his family would do. December 18th. I won't let them take this baby. Thomas wanted us free, and I'll die before I let James lock us away in his controlled, manipulated world. Tomorrow I leave. No phone, no credit cards, no electronic trails. Just cash, my journal, and Grandma Rose's quilt. The baby kicked today, strong and sure, like a sign, like Thomas telling me to be brave. The last entry was from this morning, written in the shaky scrawl of someone writing in a moving car. I don't know where I'm going, but I know what I'm running from. Please, Thomas, watch over us. Guide us somewhere. Safe. Clara's eyes grew heavy as the storm raged outside. The cabin was solid, warm despite its Spartan furnishings. A man's cabin, she'd noted upon breaking in. Everything practical, organized, but with a layer of dust that spoke of isolation. On the mantel, a bronze figure of a cowboy on horseback. By the door, work boots and a heavy ranch coat. She should leave before he returned, but the baby moved again, a gentle flutter that had become her comfort in these weeks of running. Just a few hours of rest, she told herself, as her eyes drifted closed, just until the storm passed. She didn't know then that she was about to become part of someone else's story, a story as complex and wounded as her own. The creak of the cabin door startled Clara awake. For a moment, disoriented by sleep and exhaustion, she couldn't remember where she was. Then she saw him, a tall figure silhouetted in the doorway, snow swirling around his broad shoulders, his expression hidden in shadow. Neither of them moved. The grandmother's quilt slipped from Clara's shoulders as she tried to stand, her pregnant body betraying her attempt at a quick escape. The man's hand remained on the door handle, as if he too were frozen in this moment of mutual discovery. I'm sorry, Clara managed, one hand protectively covering her belly. I thought the cabin was abandoned. I just needed... Her voice trailed off as he stepped inside, shutting the door against the howling wind. In the dim light she could see his face now, weathered, bearded, with eyes that carried their own kind of storm. "Sit," he said, his voice rough from disuse, "before you fall." It wasn't quite kindness in his tone, but it wasn't threat either. Clara sank back into the chair, her legs trembling. The quilt lay pooled at her feet, its familiar pattern of roses and vines a stark contrast to the cabin's austere furnishings. Wyatt moved to the wood stove, adding logs with practiced efficiency. The fire's glow strengthened, pushing back the gathering darkness. He didn't look at her as he worked, but she could feel him taking her measure in his peripheral vision, noting her condition, her clothes, the small backpack by her feet. "Storm's getting worse," he said, finally straightening up. "Highway's probably closed by now." He paused, studying the window where snow was already building up in the corners. "You got someone coming for you?" Clara wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the baby shift restlessly. "No," she answered honestly. "There's no one." Something in her voice must have carried the weight of that truth, because he turned to look at her fully then, his expression unreadable. "When's the baby due?" The question was unexpected, delivered in that same neutral tone that revealed nothing of his thoughts. "February." Clara reached down for her grandmother's quilt, needing its familiar comfort. As she pulled it up, a corner caught on the chair, revealing the embroidered name in one corner, Rose Bennett, 1952. She saw his eyes catch on it, noting the craftsmanship that spoke of a different era, when things were made to last generations. That's a long way off to be traveling alone in this weather. There was no judgment in his observation, just a statement of fact. The wind rattled the windows, emphasizing his point. Clara's fingers traced the quilted pattern she knew by heart. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "the storm you're running from is worse than the one you're running into." She hadn't meant to say so much, but exhaustion had loosened her guard. Wyatt moved to the small kitchen area, his movements deliberate as he put a kettle on the propane stove. The familiar domestic sound felt surreal in the tension of the moment. "You break any laws?" he asked, his back to her. "No." The answer came quick and firm. "But there are people who think they own me, who want to take my baby." Her hand pressed against her belly again, an unconscious gesture of protection. He turned then, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, of the kind of desperation that would drive a pregnant woman to break into a stranger's cabin in a snowstorm. For a long moment he said nothing, just watched the kettle, as if it might hold answers to questions he hadn't asked. "Cabin's got a second room," he said finally. "Never use it myself. Bed's made up, though. Rosa, my foreman's wife, she comes up sometimes to check on things." He poured hot water into 2 mugs, adding tea bags with careful precision. "Storm's supposed to last through tomorrow at least." Clara understood what he wasn't saying directly, that she could stay, at least, until the weather cleared. She watched as he set one of the mugs on the small table beside her, keeping a careful distance between them. "I'm Clara," she offered, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Clara Bennett, Wyatt Hale." He settled into the other chair, his own mug untouched. "This is my ranch you wandered onto." There was something almost gentle in how he said it, like he was trying to soften the fact that she was technically trespassing. The quilt lay across her lap now, its weight as familiar as memory. Her grandmother had always said it was meant to comfort travelers, having been pieced together from fabrics collected on Rose's own journey west as a young bride. Now, generations later, it was serving that purpose again. Outside, the storm gathered strength, but inside the cabin, something fragile was taking shape. A temporary truce between 2 people who had learned the hard way that trust was a currency best spent carefully. Neither of them knew it yet, but the storm that had brought them together would last far longer than any weather forecast could predict. The kitchen stood silent, a museum of abandoned routines. Wyatt hadn't cooked a proper meal here since. He pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the practical problem at hand. His unexpected guest needed food, and his usual fare of coffee and whatever remained edible in his freezer wouldn't suffice for a pregnant woman. "I can help," Clara offered from the doorway, the quilt still wrapped around her shoulders. She'd been watching him stare at his nearly empty cupboards for several minutes. Wyatt shook his head. "You should rest." But even as he said it, his eyes drifted to the highest shelf, where a wooden box sat gathering dust. Sarah's recipe box. He'd put it up there himself, the day after the funeral, unable to bear the sight of her careful handwriting, her notes in the margins, her joy preserved in index cards and food stains. Clara moved into the kitchen anyway, her presence somehow both gentle and determined. "I'm pregnant, not helpless," she said, a hint of humor warming her voice, "and I used to teach home economics along with my regular classes." She paused, noting the direction of his gaze. "What's up there?" For a moment, Wyatt considered lying. Instead, he found himself reaching up, bringing down the box he hadn't touched in 5 years. The wood was smooth under his fingers, worn from years of use before it became just another relic. "My wife's," he said simply, setting it on the counter. "Sarah's." Clara's hand hovered over the box, not quite touching it. "May I?" Something in her tone, respect, understanding, a recognition of the weight this simple object carried, made him nod. She opened it carefully, as if handling sacred texts. In a way, they were. Sarah had inherited some of the recipes from her. Mother added her own discoveries, marked her favorites with little stars in the corners. Miguel's favorite soup, Clara read from one card, her finger tracing the faded writing. "Because that man would live on coffee and tortillas if we let him." She smiled at the note, then looked at Wyatt. "You still have Miguel?" "Still here," Wyatt confirmed, surprised by how the memory didn't cut as sharply as he expected. "Still living on coffee and tortillas when his wife Rosa isn't watching." Clara continued exploring the box, pulling out cards. With gentle reverence, she organized them by season, she observed, and these little notes, she must have been wonderful in the kitchen. She lived for feeding people. The words came easier than he thought possible. Said a house wasn't really a home until it smelled like bread baking. Moving with quiet purpose, Clara selected several cards. "We have everything for her winter vegetable soup," she said, studying the ingredients. "And," she held up another card, "her emergency biscuits. For when someone needs comfort more than perfection," she read from Sarah's notes. Wyatt should have stopped her, should have put the box back on its shelf, retreated to the familiar solitude of his grief. Instead, he found himself pulling out vegetables from the crisper drawer, carrots and celery that Rosa insisted on restocking even though he rarely cooked. They worked in companionable silence, the recipe cards propped against the backsplash. Clara moved through his kitchen as if she could read its history in the worn spots on the linoleum, the scratch marks on the counter where Sarah used to knead bread. She didn't ask questions, didn't push for more than he offered, but somehow her presence made the memories feel less like wounds and more like well-worn photographs. The soup simmered, filling the kitchen with familiar scents. Clara's biscuits, made from Sarah's recipe, turned golden in the oven. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, something was thawing. She would have liked this, Wyatt said quietly, surprising himself. At Clara's questioning look, he added, someone using her recipes again, making her kitchen feel like... He stopped, unable to finish. Like a home? Clara suggested softly, one hand resting on her belly as she stirred the soup with the other. Wyatt nodded, watching as she used Sarah's old wooden spoon, the one with the burn mark, from the time they'd gotten distracted dancing in the kitchen. The memory rose up gentle as a snowflake, and for the first time in years, he let it come. When Miguel arrived later that evening to check on him, the foreman stopped in the doorway, his eyes wide at the sight of the lit kitchen, the steam on. The windows, the smell of fresh biscuits. He looked at Wyatt, questions in his eyes, but said nothing about the miracle of Sarah's recipe box coming down from its shelf. Instead, he accepted a bowl of soup, broke open a warm biscuit, and shared. A meal in a kitchen that was remembering how to be more than just a room full of ghosts. 3 days after the storm, the roads finally cleared enough for travel. Clara stood at the cabin window, watching Wyatt scrape ice from his truck's windshield. Her hand pressed against her belly, feeling the familiar morning movements that had become her private ritual with her child. "You're sure about this?" she asked when he came back inside, his beard frosted with snow. The prospect of going into town terrified her, but she knew she couldn't put off seeing a doctor forever. Not with the baby. "Doc Martha's good people," Wyatt said, handing her a heavy coat that had belonged to Sarah. They both pretended not to notice how his hands lingered on the fabric before letting go. And discreet. She delivered half the kids in 3 counties, without ever spreading a word of gossip. The drive into town took nearly an hour, the truck's chains grinding against packed snow. Clara watched the landscape unfold. Vast white plains broken by clusters of buildings that grew more frequent as they approached civilization. Wyatt drove carefully, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift, as if ready for any surprise the winter road might offer. "Tell me about Dr. Martha," Clara said, needing conversation to distract her from her growing anxiety. "Came here 30 years ago as a young doctor, chose us over some fancy city practice." He paused at an intersection, checking for ice. "Lost. Her husband in 92. Massive heart attack. She was the only doctor for 50 miles, had to pronounce him herself." The story hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken understanding about grief and duty. The clinic sat on the edge of town, a converted Victorian house with gingerbread trim, painted in fading blues and whites. A few other vehicles dotted the parking lot, their exhaust creating ghost-like plumes in the cold air. "Well, look what the storm blew in," came a voice as they entered. The woman behind the reception desk was probably in her 70s, her silver hair swept up in a neat bun. "Wyatt Hale, as I live and breathe. Haven't seen you since..." She stopped, noticing Clara. "Morning, Madge," Wyatt said quietly. "Clara here needs to see Doc Martha. Baby checkup." Madge's eyes took in everything: Clara's obvious pregnancy, the way she wore Sarah's coat, how Wyatt stood slightly in front of her, protective without being obvious about it. "Of course," she said smoothly, her earlier surprise masked by professional efficiency. "Let me just get your paperwork started, dear." Clara felt her panic rising as she stared at the forms. Name, address, previous medical history, everything she'd been trying to hide. Wyatt must have sensed her tension because he stepped closer. his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Use the ranch address," he said. "You're staying there anyway, for now." The examination room was warm, decorated with faded prints of wildflowers and medical diagrams. Dr. Martha Wilson proved to be a tall woman with kind eyes and capable hands that had clearly guided thousands of new lives into the world. "So," she said after the initial examination, "everything looks healthy, strong heartbeat, good position." She adjusted the ultrasound machine, moving the wand with practiced precision. "Would you like to see your baby?" The image flickered to life on the screen, grainy, black and white, but unmistakably a child. A Clara's child. She felt tears spring to her eyes as a tiny hand seemed to wave. "I'll print you a picture," Dr. Martha said softly, her fingers moving over the keyboard. "First photo of your little one." She paused, glancing at Wyatt, who stood by the door, his eyes fixed on the screen with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. "Would you like a copy too?" The question hung in the air. Clara held her breath, watching Wyatt's internal struggle play across his face. Finally, he nodded, a slight motion that seemed to cost him considerable effort. Later, in the truck, Clara held both copies of the ultrasound. "You don't have to keep it," she said, offering him an escape. Wyatt's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Put it in the glove compartment," he said roughly. "It'll be safe there." They were halfway home before he spoke again. "Town will be talking by sundown. Madge saw you wearing Sarah's coat." Doc Martha saw, he stopped, swallowed, "saw how I looked at that screen." "We could leave," Clara offered, though the words hurt to say. "Find somewhere else." "No." His response was immediate, firm. "Winter's not done with us yet, and you need—" He gestured vaguely at the glove compartment where the ultrasound photo lay. "You need doctors who know what they're doing. People you can trust. People you trust." Clara corrected gently. Wyatt nodded, his eyes on the snow-covered road. "Ahead." "Yeah," he agreed, "and people I trust." Neither mentioned how the doctor had written Hale on the ultrasound printouts following Madge's paperwork. Neither talked about how no one in town had questioned Clara's presence at Wyatt's side, and neither spoke of how the tiny being in that grainy photo had somehow, in the space of a single medical appointment, become something more than just Clara's future. The box sat in the attic like a time capsule, Christmas, written in Sarah's flowing script across its side. Clara discovered it while searching for extra blankets, dust motes dancing in the beam of her flashlight. She shouldn't have been up there, shouldn't have been climbing the narrow attic stairs in her condition, but Wyatt was out with Miguel, checking the herd, and the December chill had her seeking warmer bedding. She left the box where it sat, understanding instinctively that some discoveries needed to wait for their proper time. But that evening, as they sat in the kitchen sharing another meal made from Sarah's recipes, she found herself speaking of it. "I saw the Christmas box today," she said carefully, watching Wyatt's fork pause halfway to his mouth. "In the attic." He set the fork down slowly, deliberately. "Hasn't been opened since—" He didn't finish, but he didn't have to. 5 Christmases had passed since Sarah's death, each one marked only by the passage of days on a calendar. Miguel's kids, Clara ventured, thinking of the foreman's 3 young children she'd met last week. They might enjoy seeing the ranch decorated for Christmas. She left the suggestion hanging, light as a snowflake, ready to let it melt away if he wasn't ready. Wyatt pushed his plate back, his expression distant. "Sarah loved Christmas," he said finally. "Started decorating right after Thanksgiving. Said it wasn't about the day itself, it was about the whole season of hope." Clara waited, sensing he had more to say. She made everything special, strung lights along the porch rails, put candles in every window. His voice grew softer. "Said it was to guide people home through the dark." "That's beautiful," Clara said, quietly, one hand resting on her belly where the baby moved restlessly. Wyatt stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, Clara thought she'd pushed too far, but instead of leaving the room, he moved to the back door, pulling on his heavy coat. "Attic stairs aren't safe," he said gruffly. "I'll bring the box down." The cardboard box, when he set it on the kitchen table, seemed both smaller and larger than Clara had expected. Small to contain 5 years of avoided memories, large with the weight of what those memories might bring. Wyatt stood back, hands shoved in his pockets, as Clara carefully opened the lid. The scent of pine needles and cinnamon emerged, preserved somehow in the tissue paper wrappings. She lifted out each item with reverence. Hand-blown glass ornaments, delicate angel figurines, strings of lights tested and coiled with precise care. She collected angels, Wyatt said, moving closer despite himself. One new one each year, his. Rough fingers brushed against a crystal angel with gold-tipped wings. This was the last one, Christmas before. At the bottom of the box lay a tree skirt, hand-quilted with scenes of winter wildlife. "Did she make this?" Clara asked, admiring the intricate stitching. "Her mother did. Wedding gift." Wyatt touched the fabric, and something in his face shifted. "Rosa's been asking about Christmas dinner. Says the kids want to see where their papa works." He paused. Maybe it's time to let some light back in." They worked together through the evening, Clara unwrapping decorations while Wyatt strung lights along the porch. Each item seemed to carry its own story, which Wyatt shared in bits and pieces, like a man slowly awakening from a long winter's sleep. "This one," he said, holding up a wooden ornament painted with childish care. "Miguel's oldest made it. First Christmas they worked here. Sarah hung it right in front where everyone could see it. When Rosa arrived the next morning with a casserole, and her usual concern for Wyatt's eating habits, she stopped dead in the doorway. Candlelight flickered in every window, and angels watched from various perches around the room. The scent of pine and cinnamon had replaced the usual coffee and dust smell of the house. "Oh," she breathed, tears springing to her eyes. "Oh, Wyatt." Clara found the box, he explained, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did, because Rosa immediately enveloped Clara in a careful hug. "Stay for coffee," Clara offered, already moving to the kitchen where cinnamon rolls from Sarah's recipe box were keeping warm in the oven. "Help us plan Christmas dinner." Rosa's smile was radiant as she followed, already talking about her children's excitement, the dishes she could bring, how Miguel could help string lights on the big pine tree near the driveway. Wyatt remained in the doorway, watching the two women bend their heads together over Sarah's recipe box, planning a celebration he hadn't thought he'd ever host again. The crystal angel caught the morning light, sending prisms dancing across the walls. Sarah had always said Christmas light was special, that it showed up brightest in the darkest times. Standing there, watching Clara laugh at something Rosa said, Wyatt thought maybe, just maybe, Sarah had been right about that too. Sheriff Dan Hawkins had known Wyatt Hale for 20 years, which was why he drove out to the ranch himself instead of making a phone call. The manila envelope in his passenger seat contained papers that needed a personal touch, and maybe a warning. Wyatt was in the barn when the sheriff's truck pulled up, doing maintenance on the tractor with Miguel. The Christmas lights Clara had convinced him to string along the barn's edge twinkled incongruously in the winter afternoon. "Dan." Wyatt straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. "Everything all right?" The sheriff's eyes tracked Miguel's discreet departure before speaking. "Got some papers today, from a law firm in Missoula." He pulled the envelope from his coat. "Someone's looking for your house guest." Wyatt's expression hardened, but he took the envelope, leading the way to his office, a small room off the barn, where he handled the ranch's business. The space smelled of leather and coffee, with neat stacks of invoices and breeding records. On the desk, "They're not trying to hide their influence," Dan said as Wyatt opened the envelope. Letter came with calls from the state attorney's office, 2 judges and a state senator, all very concerned about a vulnerable pregnant widow who's apparently being hidden from her family. Wyatt spread the documents across his desk. Court orders, affidavits, medical evaluations, all painting a picture of Clara as unstable, potentially dangerous to herself and her unborn child. All signed by respected doctors, all legally pristine, all Lies. James Bennett, Wyatt read from on letterhead. Clara's brother-in-law? Man's got connections, Dan confirmed. Deep ones. Been asking questions all over the state, starting with hospitals, clinics. Doc Martha? Called her yesterday. Wanted Clara's records. The sheriff's mouth tightened. Martha told him about doctor-patient confidentiality. He told her about his friends on the medical board. Wyatt's hands clenched on the papers. She didn't. Course not. Martha delivered my kids, same as half the county. But Bennett's serious. These papers. Dan tapped the desk. They're just the official warning shot. Man like that, used to getting his way. He's probably already got someone watching the ranch. As if on cue, they heard the crunch of tires on the gravel drive. Through the office window, they watched an unfamiliar black SUV with Missoula plates roll to a stop. A man in an expensive wool coat stepped out, his city shoes unsuited for the snow and mud. Right on schedule, Dan muttered. Wyatt was already moving, but the sheriff caught his arm. Think it through, son. Man's got enough juice to make real trouble. He's not touching her. Didn't say he should, just said think it through. Dan's eyes were kind, but serious. Clara's got rights. That baby's got rights. But only if we handle this smart. The man from the SUV was halfway to the barn when Clara emerged from the house, carrying a basket of fresh eggs from the chicken coop. She stopped dead when she saw him, the basket slipping from her fingers. Even from the office window, they could see her face go pale. Hello, Clara. James Bennett's voice carried clearly in the winter air. Time to come home, don't you think, Wyatt? Moved faster than Dan could stop him, but it was Miguel who reached Clara first, appearing from behind the truck where he'd been checking the chains. The foreman positioned himself casually between Clara and her brother-in-law, his stance relaxed but unmistakably protective. Sir, Miguel said politely, this is private property. James Bennett smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. I'm here for my sister-in-law, family matter. He produced a paper from his coat. I have legal authority. You have nothing. Clara's voice shook but held firm. Those papers, like all your papers, are built on lies. Clara, be reasonable. Think of the baby. Think of Thomas's child. Don't. The word cracked like a whip. Don't you dare use Thomas's name. He was trying to save me from you. Something ugly flickered across James Bennett's face. You're upset, confused. The doctors all agree. The doctors you paid. Wyatt's quiet voice cut through the confrontation as he emerged from the barn. The ones you threatened when they wouldn't cooperate. Bennett's eyes narrowed as he studied. Wyatt, and you are the owner of this private property you're trespassing on. Wyatt moved to stand beside Clara, close enough that his arm brushed hers. And a friend of Sheriff Hawkins here. Dan stepped out of the barn, his badge catching the winter light. Might want to check the local statutes, Mr. Bennett. Montana takes property rights pretty serious, and harassment charges stick, even with friends in high places. This isn't over. Bennett's smile was cold as he backed toward his SUV. Clara knows what's at stake, don't you, dear? All those memories of Thomas, all those private moments. Would be a shame if certain photos found their way to his former students, their parents. Clara's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the frozen yard. Then Wyatt spoke, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man used to winter storms. Take a good look around, Mr. Bennett. See those cameras on the barn? On the house? Ranch this size, we watch for rustlers, predators. He paused significantly. Store everything digital these days. Back it up too. Never know when you might need proof of trespassing, threatening behavior, blackmail attempts. The implications hung in the air like frost. Bennett's smile finally slipped as he looked up at the cameras, then at the sheriff, then at the four. People standing unified before him. We'll talk again, he said, but the confident edge was gone from his voice. They watched in silence as he drove away, his SUV leaving dark tracks in the pristine snow. Clara's legs gave out the moment he was gone. Wyatt caught her before she could fall, one arm strong around her waist. The baby kicked against his hand, a forceful reminder of everything at stake. Inside Rosa's voice came from the porch. She'd appeared without anyone noticing, as she often did when needed. "Clara needs tea and we need to talk." In the warmth of the kitchen, surrounded by Christmas decorations that now felt like shields against the darkness outside, they spread Bennett's papers on the table where Sarah's recipe box had sat just days before. Each document told its own story of manipulation, of power wielded like a weapon, of a family's control masked as concern. "We'll fight this," Wyatt said, watching Clara's fingers trace the lies written about her. "Together." She looked up at him, tears making her eyes bright. "Why? Why would you take this on?" Wyatt thought of Sarah, of loss, of second chances, of Christmas lights meant to guide people home through the dark. "Because," he said simply, "some storms you shouldn't have to face alone." The old western saddle gleamed in the morning light, its weathered leather telling stories of decades of use. Clara ran her fingers over the intricate tooling, leaves and vines worn smooth by time and countless rides. Wyatt had pulled it from the tack room after breakfast, announcing it was time she learned about ranch life. Proper. It was Sarah's, he said quietly, watching Clara explore the saddle's details. Her father made it for her 16th birthday, spent a year working the leather just right. He touched a small mark near the horn. "That's his maker's mark there." "It's beautiful," Clara breathed, tracing the signature. "But Wyatt, I've only ridden ponies at county fairs." Time to change that. His voice held a gentleness she was starting to recognize. The tone he used when pushing past his own comfort to help someone else find theirs. "Can't live on a ranch without knowing horses. Sides, Doc Martha says light exercise is good for you and the little one." Rosa appeared in the barn doorway carrying 2 thermoses. "Ah, Sarah's saddle," she said, her smile warm. "I wondered when you'd bring that out." She handed 1 thermos to Clara. "Ginger tea for the morning sickness. And coffee for the instructor," she added with a wink at Wyatt. The mare Wyatt had chosen for Clara stood patiently in the cross ties, a gentle buckskin named Daisy who taught Miguel's children to ride. Her pregnant belly created a kind of sympathy with Clara's own changing body. "She's like us," Clara said softly, offering her palm for the horse to sniff. "Expecting in spring." "Best teacher there is," Wyatt agreed, showing Clara how to brush the mare's coat in long, smooth strokes. "Knows what it's like to carry precious cargo." The morning passed in quiet instruction. Wyatt's hands were sure but careful as he showed Clara how to check the cinch, how to mount without straining herself, how to find her seat in Sarah's saddle. His voice remained steady, patient, as if teaching a pregnant city woman to ride was the most natural thing in the world. "Keep your eyes up," he reminded her as Daisy walked sedately around the arena. "Where you look, she'll go. Horse can feel your intention better than any words." Clara relaxed gradually into the rhythm, one hand resting on her belly as the other held the reins. The baby seemed to enjoy the motion, moving in time with Daisy's steps. "This feels right," she said, surprised. Sarah used to say the same. "A thing." Wyatt walked beside them, one hand ready to steady Clara if needed. "Said there's something about sitting tall in the saddle that makes you remember who you are." Was she a good rider? The best. Pride mixed with old pain in his voice. "Could handle any horse on the ranch. Taught Miguel's oldest when he was just a little thing, scared of his own shadow. Now that boy's winning rodeo ribbons." They worked until Clara's muscles began to tire, Wyatt ever watchful for signs of fatigue. As he helped her dismount, his hands strong at her waist, Clara caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What is it?" she asked. He busied himself with loosening the cinch. "Just, you look right up there, like you belong." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was ready to examine too closely. Clara turned to Daisy, stroking the mare's soft nose. "Thank you for the lesson," she said to both horse and man. "First of many," Wyatt replied, then added quickly, "if you want." "I want," Clara said softly. They worked together to clean the saddle, Wyatt showing her how to condition the leather, how to check the stitching, how to preserve the craftsmanship that Sarah's father had poured into every detail. As they worked, he told her stories about Sarah's first ride in this saddle, about teaching Miguel's children, about the ways the ranch had been built on moments like these, passed down through generations. "Your baby will learn on this saddle too," he said, then stopped, realizing what he'd implied. But Clara just smiled, running her hand over the smooth leather seat. "I'd like that," she said, "to pass on these lessons, to be part of this continuity." Rosa found them there later, still working on the saddle, Wyatt explaining the meaning behind each tooled pattern, Clara absorbing every detail, as if understanding the saddle meant understanding something larger about belonging. "You'll be ready for cattle work by spring," Rosa teased gently, but her eyes were knowing as she watched them together. Wyatt's shoulders relaxed in a way they hadn't been in years, Clara's face glowing with more than just pregnancy. "One step at a time," Wyatt said, but his hand lingered near Clara's on the saddle's pommel, as if he too was learning something new about trust and second chances. That night, Clara dreamed of riding across endless Montana plains, the saddle solid beneath her, her baby safe within her, and Wyatt beside her, all of them moving together towards some future that felt more and more like home. They found the letter while clearing the small room next to Wyatt's bedroom. Clara had been staying in the guest room downstairs, but with the baby coming in less than 2 months, they both knew she needed to be closer to the main bathroom. The envelope fell from between old books as they emptied the shelves, Sarah's handwriting immediately recognizable. Wyatt froze, his hands halfway through boxing up old magazines. March 15th, he read, his voice hollow. The date was 4 days before the accident. Clara set down the curtain she'd been folding, watching his face carefully. "Do you want me to go?" she asked softly. Wyatt shook his head, though whether in response to her question or in denial of the moment itself, she wasn't sure. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened the envelope, pulling out several pages covered in Sarah's flowing script. "My dearest Wyatt," he read, then stopped, his throat working. Clara moved closer, close enough that her shoulder brushed his, arm offering silent support. "I'm writing this from the doctor's office," he continued finally, "waiting for the results that will tell us if this baby is really happening. After so many disappointments, I'm afraid to hope, but something feels different this time." His voice broke. Clara's hand found his, squeezing gently. She could feel his pulse racing through his palm. "The nurse called me back, and it's true, we're having a baby. I'm crying as I write this, thinking of how your face will look when I tell you tonight. You've wanted this for so long, my love. We've wanted this." Wyatt sank to the floor, still holding Clara's hand, pulling her down beside him. Her pregnant belly made the movement awkward, but she managed, settling against the wall. "I know you're out checking the north pasture today, so I'm using this time to put down everything in my heart. How excited I am to see you as a father. How perfectly you'll teach our child about horses and hard work and loving the land. How your gentleness, the part you try to hide from everyone but me, will shape this little one's world." Tears fell freely now, spotting the paper. Clara reached up to brush them from Wyatt's cheek, and he leaned into her touch unconsciously, seeking comfort he'd denied himself for so long. "I've already started planning. The room next to ours will be perfect for the nursery. I can see it so clearly. The morning sun through the windows, you in the rocking chair reading stories, our baby growing up surrounded by so much love." He stopped again, his body shaking. Clara wrapped her arms around him, her own tears falling. For this woman she'd never met, for the dreams that had died with her, for the man who'd locked his grief away so tightly it was destroying him from within. But most of all, Clara read over his shoulder, taking up the letter when he couldn't continue, "I want you to know that this joy, this perfect moment of possibility, is just one of the countless gifts you've given me. You think you're rough-hewn, unfinished, but you're the most beautiful soul I've ever known. Wyatt's hand covered hers on the paper, not stopping her, but holding on as if she were a lifeline in a storm. "You've made every day an adventure, every hardship bearable, every joy doubled because I could share it with you. This baby is a miracle, but you, my love, were the first miracle in my life." The baby chose that moment to kick strongly, pressing against where Clara and Wyatt's bodies touched. He startled, then pressed his hand gently against her belly, feeling the movement of new life even as he grieved for what was lost. "I know life can change in an instant," Clara continued reading, her voice soft, "that nothing is guaranteed. But I want you to know, whatever happens, that you made all my dreams come true. That loving you has been the greatest gift of my life, that the family we're building, this love we share, is stronger than any storm." She never got to tell. "Me," Wyatt whispered, his face buried in Clara's shoulder. "About the baby. She was waiting for the right moment, was going to tell me at dinner that night, then the ice on the road." Clara held him as the storm broke, 5 years of locked-away grief pouring out. She rocked him gently, one hand in his hair, the other still holding Sarah's letter, this precious artifact of love and loss and dreams, interrupted. "So tonight," she read the final lines, her tears falling onto his neck, "when I tell you about our miracle, know that you're the biggest miracle of all, that your capacity for love is endless, even when you doubt it, that whatever comes, my heart is forever yours." They sat there as the winter light faded, holding each other in the room that should have been a nursery, that might become one still. Clara's baby kicked again, and Wyatt's hand remained, accepting the comfort of new life even as he finally mourned the life that was lost. "She would have been an amazing mother," Clara said finally, when his breathing had steadied. "She would have loved you," Wyatt replied, his voice rough. "Would have seen what I see, how brave you are, how strong." He lifted his head, meeting her eyes. "How you brought light back into this house without even trying." The letter lay between them, its message of love and hope transcending time and loss. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and gentle, covering the ranch in new possibilities. "Thank you," Wyatt said, "for being here, for—" He gestured at the letter, at the room, at everything. Clara touched his face, wiping away the last tears. "Thank you for letting me be here, for sharing her with me." They stayed there as darkness fell, Sarah's words wrapped around them like a blessing, while the baby, a new miracle, danced beneath their joined hands. The old seed catalogue lay open on the kitchen table, its pages dog-eared and annotated in Sarah's familiar handwriting. Clara had found it tucked inside the recipe box, along with a hand-drawn map of the kitchen garden that had once flourished. "Behind the house. She planned it all out," Clara said, studying the detailed notes. "Look, tomatoes along the south fence, herbs by the kitchen door for easy reaching, flowers to attract bees." Her finger traced the careful diagrams, even calculated the succession planting dates. Wyatt leaned over her shoulder, close enough that she could feel his warmth. Since finding Sarah's letter 2 weeks ago, something had shifted between them, as if giving voice to grief had created space for something else to grow. "Haven't touched that garden since." He cleared his throat. "Ground's probably hard as iron now. Miguel says he has a tiller we can borrow." Clara turned to face him, her 8-month belly brushing against his arm, and Roses offered to share seedlings from her greenhouse. Wyatt studied her face, noting the hope there, the gentle determination that had become so familiar. "You sure you're up for this? In your condition? Dr. Martha says gardening is good exercise, as long as I'm careful." She patted her belly. "Besides, this little one needs to learn about growing things right from the start." Something softened in Wyatt's expression. "Sarah used to say that too, that understanding how things grow was the best education." He picked up a packet of marigold seeds that had fallen from the catalogue. These were her favorites, said they were like tiny suns, bringing light to the darker corners. That afternoon found them in the old garden plot, Miguel's tiller breaking up years of neglect, while Clara and Rosa sorted through seed packets at the picnic table. The spring air held the promise of warmth, though patches of snow still lingered in the shadowed places. "Thomas used to grow herbs for me," Clara said quietly, organizing the packets by planting date. "Just a few pots on our apartment windowsill, but he was so proud when I used them in cooking." Rosa reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Then we'll plant extra herbs, see? Near the kitchen, like Sarah did. Good memories can grow alongside the new ones." Wyatt worked the tiller in steady rows. His shoulders relaxed in a way Clara had never seen before. Every so often he'd stop, picking up a stone or examining the soil's texture. Once, he called her over to show her an earthworm, a sign, he said, that the ground remembered its purpose. "Life finds a way," he said, watching the worm disappear into the dark earth. "Just needs a little help sometimes." By late afternoon, the plot was ready. Clara stood at its edge, Sarah's garden map in one, and a packet of early pea seeds in the other. The baby kicked vigorously, as if eager to participate. "Would you like to plant the first seeds?" she asked Wyatt. He hesitated only a moment before joining her. Together, they pressed the first peas into the soil, Clara guiding his hands to the right depth, Wyatt showing her how to tamp the earth gently over them. "Sarah always said a garden needs a blessing," Rosa commented from where she was marking out rows with twine. "A prayer for good growth." Clara looked at Wyatt, saw the memory move across his face like clouds across the Montana sky. What blessing did she use? "May what was lost be found," he recalled softly. "May what sleeps awaken. May what we plant in love grow strong and true." The words settled over the freshly turned earth like a gentle rain. Clara felt tears prick. Her eyes, pregnancy hormones, she told herself, but knowing it was more than that. "It's a good blessing," she said, "for gardens and other things too." Wyatt's hand found hers, dirt-covered fingers intertwining. Above them, meadowlarks sang their spring songs, and the afternoon light turned the remaining snow to diamonds. They worked until the sun began to set, marking rows, planting seeds, setting down roots both literal and metaphorical. Rosa brought out thermoses of tea and coffee, and they sat at the picnic table, planning the growing season ahead. Peas giving way to tomatoes, lettuce to squash, bare earth to abundance. "We'll need to put up a fence," Wyatt mused, sketching. "Ideas on the back of Sarah's garden map. Keep the deer out, maybe a gate here with an arch for climbing beans." Clara watched him plan, saw how the future was taking shape in his mind again. The garden would grow, the baby would come, and life, persistent, determined life, would continue its ancient cycle of renewal. Later, putting away the seed packets in a box Rosa had brought, Clara found one last envelope at the bottom of Sarah's, a catalogue. Inside were marigold seeds, carefully saved, with a note in Sarah's handwriting, "For the next gardener who needs some sun." She showed it to Wyatt, who stared at the envelope for a long moment before saying, "Guess she knew someone would come along eventually. Someone who'd understand about growing things. Someone who'd help you remember how to grow too," Clara added softly. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and smiled, a full, unguarded smile that held all the promise of spring. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, hand-delivered to the mailbox at the end of the drive. Clara found it while collecting the seed catalogues she'd ordered, her heart stopping at the familiar corporate letterhead of Bennett Legal Associates. "My dear Clara, it began in James's precise handwriting. I trust this finds you enjoying your rustic adventure. How fascinating that you found comfort in the arms of another grieving widow. One might almost call it poetic, if it weren't so tragically misguided." Her hands shook as she read on, the baby shifting restlessly as if sensing her distress. "I've been patient, allowing you this little rebellion, but time grows short, and we both know what's at stake. The photos I mentioned, they've been digitized now. Amazing how quickly things can spread online these days. One click, and Thomas's reputation at the school, his legacy with those children he loved teaching, all of it could vanish, but it doesn't have to be this way. Come home voluntarily, and everything can remain safely buried. Your rancher friend need never know about your more intimate moments with my brother, and Thomas's memory can remain untarnished. You have until Friday to make the right choice. For everyone's sake, don't disappoint me again. Yours in concern, James Clara. Wyatt's voice came from the barn, followed by his footsteps approaching. She tried to hide the letter, but her movements were too slow, hampered by her now prominent belly and trembling hands. What's wrong? He was beside her instantly, one hand steady on her elbow. When she couldn't speak, he gently took the letter, reading it with growing tension in his jaw. "Son of a bitch," he breathed. Then immediately, "Sorry, little one." To her belly, a habit he'd developed over the past months. "He'll do it," Clara whispered. "He'll destroy everything Thomas worked for, everything he loved." "No, he won't." Wyatt's voice held the same quiet authority he used with spooked horses. "Come on, there's something you need to see." He led her to his office in the barn, where he pulled out a laptop, something she'd rarely seen him use. "Been working on this with Dan and Doc Martha since his last visit. Figured we'd need it eventually." The screen filled with documents, bank records, emails, medical reports. "James's perfect paper trail has some holes," Wyatt explained. "Dan found irregularities in those medical evaluations. Martha reached out to other doctors who'd supposedly signed off on your condition. 3 of them never heard of you. But the photos he has, yeah, about those." Wyatt's face darkened. Rosa's boy is good with computers. He traced the email threats James sent. Found metadata showing when the photos were taken, all after Thomas died. Clara sank into Wyatt's chair, understanding dawning. He staged them, professional photographer on his payroll, took pictures of you going about your daily life, doctored them to look more suspicious. Classic stalker behavior, Dan's words, not mine. Fresh tears spilled, but these were different. Tears of relief, of anger, of vindication. All this time, I thought, I was so afraid people would believe. Only thing people are going to believe is the truth. Wyatt knelt beside the chair, taking her hands in his. That James Bennett is a control freak who couldn't stand losing his brother's estate to you and the baby. That he manufactured evidence, committed fraud, harassed a pregnant widow. The door burst open, making them both jump. Miguel stood there, his usually calm face tight with urgency. "He's here. Bennett. Got 2 guys with him this time." Wyatt stood, his expression hardening. "Clara, stay." "No." She grabbed his arm, pulling herself up. "I'm done hiding, done being afraid." They emerged from the barn together, Clara's hand firmly in Wyatt's, to find James Bennett and 2 suits standing in the yard. Rosa was on the porch, phone to her ear, while Miguel positioned himself casually near the tool rack where various heavy implements hung. "Touching scene," James called out, his smile cold. "But it's time to end this little fantasy, Clara. You know what's at stake." "No, James." Her voice carried clearly across the yard. "I know what you want everyone to think is at stake, just like I know about the fake photos, the forged medical reports, the judges you bribed." Something flickered in James's expression. Surprise quickly masked. "You're upset, confused. The doctors all agree." "The doctors you paid." Wyatt's quiet words cut through the bluster. "Or the ones who've never heard of Clara? 'Cause we've got signed statements from 3 of them saying they never evaluated her, never signed those reports you're so fond of waving around. You're making serious accusations." "Not accusations." Sheriff Dan's voice came from behind them as his truck pulled up. "Evidence of fraud, harassment, stalking across state lines. That last one's federal, by the way." James's smile vanished. "Entirely. You have no proof." "Actually," Rosa called from the porch, "we do. My Alejandro, you remember him, see? The computer genius you tried to bribe last week? He kept very good records of that conversation. And the money you offered him to doctor those photos even more." One of James's suited companions stepped back, legal instincts clearly warning him away from what was unfolding. The other reached into his jacket, but Miguel's quiet "I wouldn't" made him reconsider. "It's over, James." Clara moved forward, Wyatt solid beside her. "Thomas knew what you were. That's why he was planning to leave, to protect us from you. I found his letters, the house he'd bought in Oregon, the teaching positions he'd arranged. You didn't just kill his reputation. You killed his dream of freedom. You can't prove." James started, but Clara wasn't finished. "But we can prove. The fraud, the stalking, the bribes. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. You're going to stop threatening me. Stop trying to control Thomas's legacy. Because if you don't, everything we have goes to the FBI. And your carefully built reputation, your connections, they won't save you from federal charges." The yard fell silent, except for the wind in the pines and the distant lowing of cattle. James looked around slowly, taking in the witnesses, the sheriff, the evidence of his carefully constructed world crumbling. "You'll regret this," he said finally, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. "No," Clara said softly, feeling her baby kick as if in agreement. "The only thing I regret is not standing up to you sooner." "Goodbye, James." They watched him leave, his expensive SUV carrying him and his suits back toward a world where money and influence usually bought compliance. Only when the dust settled did Clara's legs give out, Wyatt catching her against his chest. "You did good," he murmured into her hair. "You did real good." Dan approached, his badge catching the spring sunlight. "We'll need statements when you're ready. And Martha's got those doctors willing to testify if it comes to that." "It won't," Rosa said firmly from the porch. "Men like him, they only have power when people are afraid. Clara's not afraid anymore." Clara looked up at Wyatt, saw in his eyes the same pride she felt in her heart. "No," she agreed, "I'm not afraid anymore. Because fear couldn't take root here, in this place where love grew stronger than threats, where truth bloomed more powerful than lies, where family meant more than blood or legal documents ever could. The courthouse in Helena seemed to loom larger than its 3 stories, its granite facade stern against the April sky. Clara sat in Wyatt's truck, one hand protectively over her belly, the other clutching a folder of documents they'd spent weeks preparing. "You don't have to do this today," Wyatt said softly. "We could wait." "No," Clara straightened her shoulders. "The baby comes in 3 weeks. I want this settled before then." She touched the folder, feeling the edges of Sarah's letter tucked. Inside, her own talisman of courage. "I want our child born into freedom, not fear." Inside, Dr. Martha already waited with their lawyer Susan Chen, a sharp-eyed woman who'd taken their case pro bono after hearing their story. Rosa sat beside, her dressed in her Sunday best, a stack of notarized statements from the community in her lap. "Ready?" Susan asked, though her eyes were kind as she took in Clara's exhaustion. At 8.5 months pregnant, even sitting upright was becoming a challenge. "More than ready," Clara answered, feeling Wyatt's steadying presence behind. Her chair. The custody hearing was supposed to be a formality. James had withdrawn his petition after their confrontation at the ranch. But Clara wanted more than just his retreat. She wanted legal protection, wanted the truth on record, wanted to close this chapter decisively before opening the next. Judge Marion Blackwood entered, her silver hair cut short, her eyes missing. Nothing as she surveyed the courtroom. James sat on the other side with his lawyer, his usual polished appearance somewhat dimmed. "Your Honor," Susan began, "we're here today not only to dismiss Mr. Bennett's custody petition, but to establish a protective order and legal documentation of my client's fitness as a parent." The judge nodded, reviewing the papers before her. "I see substantial evidence of harassment and fraudulent claims against Mrs. Bennett. Dr. Wilson." Martha stood, her testimony clear and damning. She detailed James's attempts at intimidation, the forged medical reports, her conversations with other doctors whose signatures had been used without permission. Rosa spoke next, her accented English. careful and precise as she described Clara's integration into the community, her preparation for the baby, the support system she'd built. "She is family now," Rosa concluded simply. "Our family." Through it all, Clara felt Wyatt's hand on her shoulder, anchoring her. When Susan presented the evidence of James's manipulation, the fake photos, the bribes offered to Rosa's son, the pattern of control that had started even before Thomas's death, his fingers tightened protectively. Finally, Judge Blackwood turned to James. "Mr. Bennett, do you wish to make a statement before I rule?" James stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, I acted out of concern for my brother's child. Perhaps my methods were overzealous, but everything I did was to protect. Your control," Clara interrupted, unable to stay silent. "Thomas was planning to leave you, to break free. I have proof. The house he bought in Oregon, the teaching positions, his letters explaining why." The judge raised an eyebrow at Susan, who quickly produced copies of Thomas's documents. As Judge Blackwood reviewed them, her expression hardened. "Mr. Bennett," she said finally, "I've seen many custody disputes in my years on the bench, but rarely have I encountered such a calculated campaign of harassment masked as concern." She shuffled through the papers before her. "These custody papers you filed, they're not just dismissed. I'm issuing a permanent restraining order against you and any agents acting on your behalf." She turned to Clara, her stern face softening. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm also granting your petition for sole legal and physical custody of your child, with no visitation rights to the Bennett family. Furthermore," she continued, as James began to protest, "I'm recommending the district attorney review this case for potential criminal charges." Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks as the judge signed the orders. Wyatt's hand moved from her shoulder to her neck, thumb gently wiping away the tears. "One last thing," Judge Blackwood added. "Mrs. Bennett, I see you filed a petition to restore your maiden name?" "Yes, Your Honor." Clara's voice was steady despite her tears. "Clark, Clara Clark." "Granted." The judge's pen moved across another document. "Let the record show that Clara Clark has sole custody of her child, with all rights and protections thereof." She looked directly at James. "This hearing is adjourned. Mr. Bennett, I suggest you leave the courthouse by a different exit." Outside, in the spring sunshine, Clara finally let herself collapse against Wyatt's chest. The baby kicked vigorously, as if celebrating their victory. "It's really over," she whispered. "It's really over," he confirmed, holding her close. "You're free, both of you." Rosa hugged them both, then Martha, then Susan. Even the judge stopped on her way to her car, touching Clara's arm gently. "Your husband," Judge Blackwood said quietly, "the late Mr. Bennett. From what I read in those letters, he would be proud of you today. Standing up for yourself, for your child. That's what real legacy looks like." Clara watched James's car pull away, carrying with it the last shadows of fear that had haunted her pregnancy. The custody papers in her folder, now stamped and signed, weren't just legal documents. They were her declaration of independence, her proof that love could triumph over control, that family was something you could choose and build and protect. "Let's go home," Wyatt said softly. Home. The word held new meaning now, not just a place of shelter, but a place of belonging. As they drove back toward the ranch, toward the garden where new life was sprouting, toward the future they were building. Together, Clara felt her baby move again and smiled. "Yes," she said, "let's go home." The package arrived a week after the court hearing, sent by Thomas's former teaching assistant. Inside was a leather-bound journal Clara had never seen before, along with a note explaining it had been found in Thomas's desk at school, hidden behind a loose drawer panel. Clara sat in the garden, surrounded by the emerging spring plantings, the journal heavy in her lap. Wyatt worked nearby, installing the arch for the climbing beans, but his attention kept returning to her face. "Want me to give you some privacy?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Stay, please." The baby kicked in agreement, and she smiled despite her nervousness. "We both want you here." The journal's first entry was dated 3 years into their marriage, around the time James's control had begun tightening like a noose. "Found out what happened to Dad's inheritance today," Thomas had written. "James didn't just manage it. He transferred everything into his name. Used my power of attorney, the one he had me sign when I was sick last year. Said it was for tax purposes. I've been such a fool." Clara's hands trembled as she turned the pages. Here was proof of what she'd long suspected. James's systematic manipulation of his younger brother, documented in Thomas's increasingly worried handwriting. He's doing it to Clara now, too. Little things at first, insisting on joining our dinner. Parties, suggesting where we should vacation, who we should befriend. But it's getting worse. Today he hinted that my position at the school could be complicated if I didn't agree to his investment scheme. Not a threat, he said. Never a threat. Just family looking out for family. Wyatt had stopped working, moving to sit beside her on the garden bench. His presence was solid, grounding, as she read Thomas's growing awareness of his brother's true nature, started looking for teaching positions out of state. Clara's pregnant. Found out yesterday. I won't let James control our child the way he controlled me. Found a school in Oregon that's interested in both of us. Clara's such a gifted teacher. She lights up talking about her students. James hates that she works. Hates anything that gives her independence. I see that now. The baby shifted restlessly as Clara's tears fell onto the page. Wyatt's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Made an offer on a house today. Small, but with a garden Clara will love. Paid cash through a friend so James can't trace it. I'll tell Clara everything once it's final. She's been so worried lately, sensing something's wrong but not knowing what. I've been distant, trying to protect her, but I see now that secrets don't protect anyone. They just give James more power. The next entry made Clara gasp. It was dated the day before Thomas died. Final papers came through. House is ours. Teaching contracts too. Told the school board today I'm leaving end of term. Made them promise not to say anything until I've told James. Clara's morning sickness is better. She's glowing, so beautiful. Tomorrow night I'll tell her everything. About James, about Oregon, about our fresh start. Found a little restaurant she loves. Made reservations. Going to give her back her freedom, give our baby a chance at a life without James's shadows. But tomorrow night never came. Instead, there had been a police officer at her door, words like aneurysm and instant, and nothing could be done, shattering her world. The final pages were different. Medical records, bank statements, letters from the Oregon school. Thomas had documented everything, created a paper trail of James's manipulation. And on the last page, in shaking handwriting, "If anything happens to me, Clara, know that I love you. Know that I finally found the courage to break free. Know that you gave me that courage just by being you. Be strong, my love, be free." Clara closed the journal, holding it against her heart. Wyatt's arm came around her shoulders, and she leaned into his strength. "He tried to save us," she whispered. "He was finding his way out." "He did save you," Wyatt said softly. "Those documents helped win your case. He made sure you had proof, even if he couldn't be here to use it himself." The garden around them was coming alive, tiny pea shoots reaching for the sun, herbs breaking through the soil, Sarah's marigolds spreading their first leaves. Life persisting, growing, finding new ways to bloom. "You know what's strange," Clara said, watching a butterfly land on the newly installed arch. "I've been carrying so much guilt about finding happiness here, about feeling safe with you, about building a new life. But reading this," she touched the journal, "Thomas wanted me to be free, to be happy, to give our child a life full of love and possibilities." "He sounds like a good man," Wyatt said, "someone who loved you enough to fight. For your freedom, yes." Clara smiled through her tears. "And he would be grateful knowing we found you. Knowing our baby will grow up here, surrounded by so much love." The journal sat between them, its truth finally told, its burden lifted. Above them, spring clouds sailed across the Montana sky, while in the freshly turned earth, Sarah's garden and Clara's future grew together, proving that love, both old and new, could root deep and bloom wild and free. The contractions started in the garden, just as the morning sun was touching the tops of the pea trellises. Clara had been checking the emerging seedlings, Wyatt's old shirt stretched tight across her 9-month belly, when the first pain wrapped around her like a firm hand squeezing. "Oh," she said softly, and somehow Wyatt knew, even from across the yard where he was fixing a fence post. He was beside her in moments, his hands steady as he helped her straighten up. "Time?" he asked, voice carefully controlled. "I think—" Another wave hit and she gripped his forearms. "Yes, definitely time." Rosa appeared as if summoned, a sweater already in her hands. "I called Martha," she said, wrapping the sweater around Clara's shoulders. "She's meeting us at the hospital. Miguel's bringing the truck around." Clara noticed then that Rosa carried something else, a bundle wrapped in tissue paper. "What's that?" "For later," Rosa said with a mysterious smile. "First, we get you and this baby safely where you need to be." The drive to the hospital was a blur of mounting contractions, and Wyatt's steady voice counting her through them. He'd been practicing for weeks, ever since their birthing classes with Martha. Now his calm, breathe in, hold, breathe out, kept her anchored as her body did what bodies had done since the beginning of time. At the hospital, Martha waited with her usual efficient warmth. "Let's meet this little one," she said, checking Clara's progress. "Been a while since we had a ranch baby." The labor room filled gradually with evidence of community love. Rosa's daughters brought fresh flowers from their greenhouse. Miguel's wife sent her special tea blend for strength. The sheriff's wife arrived with ice chips and back rub expertise gained from 4 deliveries of her own. But it was the package Rosa finally unwrapped that brought tears to Clara's eyes between contractions. A baby blanket, more beautiful than anything she'd ever seen, clearly handmade with extraordinary care. Squares of soft flannel alternated with patches of quilted cotton, each piece embodying love and welcome. "The women of the valley," Rosa explained, spreading the blanket across the foot of the bed. "We've been working on it since winter. Every square has a blessing, a hope for the baby." Clara touched a patch decorated with tiny embroidered horses. "Sarah's mother made this one," Wyatt said quietly. "Rosa found it in the attic, saved from before." Another contraction gripped her before she could respond, stronger than the others. Martha checked again and nodded. "Time to work. Mama, this little one's ready to meet the world." What followed was both eternal and instantaneous. Pain and power, fear and determination all mixed together. Wyatt never left her side, his strength flowing into her where their hands clasped. He murmured encouragement, wiped her face, became the rock she could lean against as her body worked its ancient magic. "I see the head," Martha announced. "Dark hair, like both its parents." Clara felt the burning pressure, the impossible stretch. "I can't." "You can." Wyatt's voice was fierce, with conviction. "You're the strongest person I know, Clara Clark. Show our little one how to be brave." Our little one. The words gave her fresh strength. One more push, one more mountain to climb, and suddenly the cry filled the room, strong and indignant and perfect. "It's a girl," Martha announced, laying the tiny, squirming body on Clara's chest. "Born under a Montana spring sky, just like her daddy." Clara couldn't see through her tears, but she felt the weight of her daughter, the incredible softness of new skin, the flutter of tiny fingers against her heart. Wyatt's hand shook as he touched the dark curls, so gentle, so afraid of breaking this miracle. Rosa draped the community blanket over them both, its warmth holding mother and child like an embrace from all the women who had stitched their hopes. into its fabric. Each square told a story. Here was Martha's precise hospital corner stitching, there Rosa's flowing Spanish prayers. Sarah's mother's horses seemed to dance along the border, while the center square held a simple embroidered heart with the words, "Welcome home, little one." "She needs a name," Martha said softly, after the necessary medical tasks were complete and mother and baby were declared healthy. Clara looked up at Wyatt, saw the love and wonder in his eyes as he gazed at their daughter. "Rose," she said. "Rose. Thomas Clark Hale." She touched the blanket square with the horses, "for all the strong women who helped bring her home." Wyatt's breath caught. "Clara, you don't have to. My name—" "Yes, I do." She shifted the baby so he could take her, watching as his large, work-roughened hands cradled their daughter with infinite tenderness. "She's yours too. Has been since that first snowstorm." "We both have." Rose yawned, her tiny face turning toward Wyatt's chest, as if she already knew his heart would always be her shelter. Outside, the spring sun touched the mountains with gold, while in the garden they'd planted together, new life reached for the light. Rosa tucked the blanket more securely around the baby, each square holding the hopes and love of the community that had become Clara's family. "Welcome to the world, Pequeña Rosa," she whispered. "You are so very loved." Rose was 6 weeks old when Wyatt brought up the adoption papers. He'd been thinking about it since her birth, since before her birth. If he was honest with himself, but finding the right moment had felt impossible. "How did you ask to legally become father to a child who already held your heart?" The moment found itself one evening as they sat on the porch swing, Rose sleeping against his chest while Clara worked on the baby book. She was pressing a sprig of Sarah's marigolds between the pages, preserving the first flowers their daughter had seen bloom. "Been talking to Susan," he said quietly, conscious of Rose's steady breathing. "About making things official." Clara's hand stilled on the flowers. "Official? Legal adoption, if you want." He forced himself to continue, though his heart hammered. "Would give Rose extra protection, insurance, inheritance rights to the ranch." "Wyatt." Clara's voice held something he couldn't quite read. "Are you asking to adopt Rose because of practical considerations?" He looked down at the dark curls nestled against his shirt, at the tiny hand clutching his finger even in sleep. "No," he admitted. "She's been mine since that first ultrasound picture. Just took me this long to find the courage to say it." Clara set aside the baby book and moved closer, fitting herself against his side. The porch swing creaked gently, its rhythm as familiar as their evening routine had become. "Show me," she said softly. He shifted Rose carefully to one arm, reaching into his shirt pocket with the other. The papers were worn at the edges from being carried around, read and reread as he gathered his courage. Clara took them, her eyes, moving over the legal language that would make their family official in the eyes of the law. Her finger traced the space where his signature would go, right next to hers. "You'd be her legal father," she said, "with all the rights and responsibilities already." "I'm in my heart." He touched Rose's cheek as she sighed in her sleep. "Just want to make sure nobody can ever question it. Want her to grow up knowing she's got 2 fathers who loved her. Thomas, who loved her enough to try to protect her before she was born. And me, who'll spend the rest of my life making sure she's safe and happy." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "You've thought about this a lot. Since that day in Martha's office, watching her on that screen. Knew then I'd do anything to protect her. To protect both of you." He paused, gathering thoughts he'd rehearsed countless times. "But I need you to be sure. This isn't just legal stuff. It's me promising to be her father forever, to love her like my own, because she is my own, in every way that matters." Clara took Rose from his arms, the movement practiced and gentle. The baby stirred but didn't wake, settling against her mother's heart. "Tell me about the day she was born," Clara said. "What you were thinking." Wyatt's throat tightened at the memory. Was thinking how perfect she was, how she... Had your nose and Thomas's curls. How I'd spend my life making sure she knew how to ride horses and grow gardens and be strong like her mama. He brushed away his own tears. Was thinking how I'd already loved her for months, watching her grow under your heart, feeling her kick when I read to her at night. Was thinking how she made me whole again, both of you did, when I thought that part of me died with Sarah. Clara shifted Rose back into his arms, then reached for the pen she kept in the baby book. Her signature flowed across the adoption papers, sure and strong in the fading light. Your turn, she whispered. His hands shook slightly as he signed, making official what his heart had known for months. Rose chose that moment to wake, her eyes already darkening to match Clara's, blinking up at him solemnly. "Hello, little Rose," he said softly. "Guess you're stuck with me now, officially and forever." She was stuck with you the moment you... "Let us stay," Clara said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "The moment you showed a scared, pregnant woman that love could be gentle, that family could be chosen, that home wasn't just a place but a feeling." From the garden, the evening breeze carried the scent of Sarah's marigolds and Clara's herbs, mingled together like their lives had become. Rose reached up, patting Wyatt's cheek with her tiny hand, as if giving her own approval to the proceedings. "Should we celebrate?" Clara asked. "Call Rosa and Miguel?" "Tomorrow," Wyatt said, pulling her closer, as Rose drifted back to sleep. "Tonight I just want this. Us, our family, official at last." The adoption papers sat in their laps, no longer just legal documents, but a testament to love's ability to grow beyond blood, beyond loss, beyond all the boundaries that fear tried to build. In the garden, the first stars appeared above the climbing beams that wrapped around the arch Wyatt had built, reaching ever higher, ever stronger, just like the love that had brought them all home. The ring had lived in Wyatt's desk drawer for 5 years, wrapped in the handkerchief Sarah had embroidered with their initials. He sat looking at it now, in the quiet hour before dawn, when Rose usually demanded her first feeding. The diamond caught the lamplight, throwing tiny rainbows. Across his worn desk calendar, "I thought I might find you here." Rosa's voice came softly from the doorway. She'd arrived early, as she often did, bringing fresh bread and her quiet wisdom. "Found it yesterday," Wyatt said, though they both knew he hadn't just found it. While looking for Rose's birth certificate for the adoption papers, Rosa pulled up the other chair, her eyes kind. "Sarah would approve, you know, of Clara wearing it, of you finding love again." "How can you be sure?" "Because I knew her heart." Rosa touched the ring gently. And this ring, it was never about possession for her. It was about promise, about building a life together, like you and Clara are doing. What if Clara thinks it's wrong, disrespectful to Thomas? Rosa's laugh was soft but firm. That woman loves you with a wisdom beyond her years. She understands that hearts can grow, that love multiplies rather than divides. Besides, she added with a knowing smile, I've seen how she looks at you when you're reading to Rose in the garden. The garden. Of course it would have to be there, where their life together had truly begun to grow, where Sarah's marigolds bloomed alongside Clara's herbs, where Rose took her afternoon naps in the shade of the bean arch, where healing and hope had taken root together. "I'll need your help," he said. Rosa's smile widened. "Miguel already has a plan for keeping Clara busy this morning, and Martha's coming by just to check on the baby." She made air quotes with her fingers. That woman never could keep a secret when it came to matters of the heart. The morning unfolded like a well-choreographed dance. Miguel appeared with questions about the north pasture that absolutely needed Clara's input. Martha arrived to whisk Rose away for her checkup, though the baby had just been seen last week. Even the weather cooperated, providing a perfect Montana summer morning, cool and clear. Wyatt worked quickly, setting up the surprise in the garden while Clara was out with Miguel. Sarah's favorite quilts created a comfortable seating area near the marigolds. The picnic basket Rosa had packed sat ready, filled with all of Clara's favorites. And in his pocket the ring waited, newly cleaned and sized, carrying with it decades of love and promise. He heard Clara's return before he saw her, her laugh carrying across the yard as she discussed something with Miguel. Then she rounded the corner of the house and stopped, taking in the scene before her. "Wyatt," her voice held question and wonder. "Join me." He held out his hand, trying to steady his racing heart. "Thought we could have breakfast in the garden, just us." She came to him slowly, her eyes moving over the quilts, the flowers, the basket. "It's beautiful," she said. "But why?" He drew her down beside him on the quilts, amongst the flowers they'd planted together. "Because this is where we began. Where you helped me remember how to live, how to love." He touched a marigold gently, where past and present grow together, making something new and beautiful. Clara's eyes filled with tears as he reached into his pocket. "Oh," she breathed, seeing the ring. "Oh, Wyatt. This ring," he said carefully, holding it between them, "belonged to a woman who taught me about love, about building a life with someone, about facing each day together." He took a deep breath. "Sarah wore it with joy, with promise, with love. And if you're willing, I'd be honored if you'd wear it now, as we build our own life together." "Are you sure?" Clara asked softly, though her eyes never left his face. "About the ring? About everything?" "More sure than I've ever been," he smiled, thinking of their journey. "You walked into my life during a snowstorm, carrying so much love inside you. Love for your unborn child, love for the man you'd lost, love for the future you were fighting to protect. You taught me that love doesn't end with loss, that it grows, changes, finds new ways to bloom." He held up the ring, letting it catch the morning light. "Sarah's love helped make me the man I am. Thomas's love gave us Rose, and your love brought me back to life, helped me remember how to hope, how to dream, how to build something new." Clara's tears fell freely now. "And your love gave us shelter, gave us home, gave us family." "Marry me?" he asked simply. "Help me keep building this life we've started. Help me raise our daughter, tend our garden, face whatever storms come our way." "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." The ring slid onto her finger, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Above them, the morning sun touched the mountains with gold, while nearby, Martha appeared on the porch with Rose, as if the baby too needed to witness this new beginning. Later, after the celebrations with Rosa and Miguel's families, after Martha had hugged them both with tears in her eyes, after Rose had been fed and changed and snuggled between them on the porch swing, Clara asked, "What do you think they'd say? Sarah and Thomas?" Wyatt looked out at their garden, where Sarah's marigolds glowed like tiny suns, and Thomas's documented love had helped set Clara free. "I think they'd say love is never wasted, that the heart's capacity for joy is endless. That family is something you build choice by choice, day by day." Clara touched the ring, now at home on her finger. "To love, then," she said softly, "past and present, growing together." "To love," Wyatt agreed, holding his family close as the evening star appeared above their home, growing together, blooming wild and free. 1 year later, almost to the day since Clara had first sought shelter in a stranger's cabin, the ranch buzzed with celebration. Rose, secure in her father's arms, watched with bright eyes as her mother adjusted her wedding dress, a simple cream-colored design that complemented the late summer flowers blooming in Sarah's garden. "Perfect," Rosa declared, tucking a marigold into Clara's hair. "Something old." She touched Sarah's ring on Clara's finger. "Something new." She gestured to the dress. "Something borrowed." She adjusted the lace shawl that had been her own mother's. "And something golden, like the flowers that brought you both back to life." Through the window, they could see Wyatt in the garden, making final adjustments to the arch where they would say their vows. The same arch that had supported last summer's bean vines now bore Sarah's marigolds and Clara's climbing roses, twined together in a tapestry of gold and white. "Ready?" Martha asked from the doorway, her camera ready for the moment that would capture their new beginning. Clara took Rose from Rosa, breathing in her daughter's sweet baby scent. At 14 months, she was a perfect blend of her origins. Thomas's curls, Clara's eyes, and a gentle strength that reminded everyone of Wyatt. "Ready, sweet girl? Ready to watch Mama and Daddy make it official?" The ceremony itself was simple, witnessed by the community that had become family. Miguel stood as Wyatt's best man, while Rosa held Rose. Sheriff Dan and his wife sat with Martha and her new husband, the widowed rancher from the next valley, who'd finally convinced her to give love another chance. Sarah's mother occupied the front row, her face bright with happy tears as she watched the man her daughter had loved find joy again. "Love," Judge Blackwood began, having insisted on performing the ceremony herself, "is not a finite resource. It grows, changes, finds new channels when old ones are blocked. Like water in this Montana landscape, it can carve new paths without erasing the ones that came before." Wyatt's hands were steady as they held Clara's, though his voice shook slightly as he spoke his vows. "I promise to love you and Rose with everything I am, to honor the past that brought us here while building the future we dream of, to face every storm together, to nurture every joy, to grow old watching our garden and our love bloom wild and free." Clara's tears fell freely as she responded, "I promise to love you with a heart that knows the value of second chances, to raise our daughter surrounded by stories of all the love that made her possible, to face each day knowing that home isn't just a place, but the family we choose and the love we grow together." Rose chose that moment to squeal with delight, reaching for the marigolds that decorated every surface. The gathered friends and family laughed, the sound carrying across the ranch like music. After the ceremony, as the celebration moved to tables, set up under the apple trees, Martha gathered them for the formal portrait. "For the mantle," she said, positioning them near the garden arch, where the old photo used to sit face down in the drawer. Clara held Rose while Wyatt's arm wrapped around them both. The late afternoon sun turned everything golden, catching the ring on Clara's finger and the happiness in their eyes. In that moment, as Martha's camera captured their joy, they were more than just a family made legal by papers and ceremonies. They were the answer to prayers spoken in loneliness, the healing of wounds carried too long, the proof that love could build bridges across loss and pain to find new life. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and Rose slept peacefully in her crib, Clara and Wyatt stood in his office, their office now. Together, they lifted the new family portrait from its wrapping and placed it on the desk where Sarah's face-down photo had lived for so long. "Look at that," Wyatt said softly, his arm around his wife. "Look what the storm blew in." Clara leaned into him, remembering that desperate night when she'd sought shelter from one storm and found refuge from all of them. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting us stay. Thank you for teaching me how to live again." He touched the photograph gently. "For showing me that family isn't just blood or law, it's choice and love and believing in second chances." Through the window, they could see their garden in the say, twilight. Sarah's marigolds glowing like memories made sweet by time, the climbing roses reaching for stars just beginning to appear. The vegetables Clara had planted promising abundance in seasons to come. Everything growing together, past and present, loss and love, all creating something new and beautiful. Rose's soft babbling came through the baby monitor, not crying but talking to herself as she often did before falling deeper into sleep. Her parents smiled, recognizing in her voice the future speaking to them of possibilities yet to bloom. "Come on," Clara said, taking Wyatt's hand. "Let's go tell our daughter a bedtime story." "Which one?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "The one about a scared pregnant woman who found shelter in a snowstorm, about a grieving man who opened not just his door but his heart, about how love can grow even in the darkest seasons, bringing light and life and hope and healing," Wyatt added, following her up the stairs to their daughter's room. "Don't forget the healing." In the office behind them, the new family portrait caught the last light of day, while beside it, Sarah's marigolds and Thomas's journal kept gentle vigil, all of them together, watching over the family that had grown. From loss and love, storm and shelter, endings and beginnings, all blooming wild and free under the vast Montana sky.